So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to draw an object from direct observation. Of course, there's no one way to say exactly this is how you do this, but I'm going to be giving you just some tips and approaches that will help you drawing from observation because it can be tricky. I'm also going to be walking you through how to use contour line in order to show form in your object. So a lot of times when you want to show form in an object, you would shade it, right? You would show areas of light and shadow, and we reviewed this previously. But when you're using just line, and specifically just contour line, you're varying your line in order to show the form of the object. You're exploiting that line as much as you possibly can to help show the viewer what the form is. So for today, what you'll need is your objects that you collected. So hopefully you have those ready and right near you. You'll need your sketchbook. You'll need something to draw with. Now I tend to like to draw with pen. For this demo, I'll draw with a pencil and then I'll move on to pen, just so that you can, I don't know, see the difference. You could try drawing with a pen for your assignment, for some of your drawings as well, if you'd like. And I would have an eraser handy, whatever kind you have, so that if you make a mistake, you can erase as well. All right. So now I've got my object sitting right directly in front of me with my sketchbook open. So setup is important because you want to really be able to see your object, and you want to make sure that you don't keep changing your view of the object, because if you change your viewpoint of the object, obviously things will change. It'll make things difficult to draw. I chose this pear because it was simple, and once I draw this pear, I might upgrade to another, say, more complicated object like this shell. But the pear is pretty basic, so I think that that's a good starting point for me. So just reposition over here. So one thing as I look at this object right off the bat, I want to just notice some things, okay? And what I notice is, first of all, I'm in a room where there's light directly above me. So there's light hitting the object from above, and I'm looking at the pear at a different angle. You guys would be seeing it from above, so what I'm seeing is different from what you're seeing in the view, but from what I can see, the top of the pear is illuminated and there's some reflections happening on the top, and then towards the base of the pear and towards the bottom of the pear, there is some shadow. And there's definitely a shadow underneath the object as well, but just because I'm seeing light and shadow doesn't mean I'm going to convert to shading. I still just want to show all that stuff using line only. So I'm going to show you how to approach that. To begin, I'm just going to start by drawing the object with a very light line. I'm not going to worry about the contour lines yet. I'm just going to worry about getting the object mapped out on my paper with a very light line to begin. So you just pick a place to start. I'm going to start at the top and work my way around this object. You might have a different approach. It doesn't really matter where you start for something as simple as this. And I'm going to just draw to the left of my paper because I want to have some room to draw some of my other objects on one page. I like to fill a page, so just being mindful of where I'm starting. And I'm just using line, a very light, loose line to start, and then I can adjust it later. I can add my contour lines in later. But right now, let's just get the object down on the paper. Drawing lightly to start because if I need to go back and erase or adjust something, like right now, I can do so with ease. I don't have to erase really hard. Okay. Does have a little lopsidedness to it. Working with bigger forms first, and then Once I have that established, getting into the smaller detailed parts like the stem would be a detail. So I wouldn't start with the stem because to me that's kind of like a minor detail. I'm starting with the bigger shapes that define the pear and getting that established first, and then going back and adding some details. I noticed that there is a bit of reflective light like bouncing off of the paper onto the edge of the pear. So I'm just gonna imply that by dropping in an outline. And I notice that the same thing happens here. So instead of shading, I'm just using a line to outline things like highlights, and things like shadow. I notice on one side of the top of the pear is in shadow a little bit more. So I'm not shading, but I'm just dropping in a line that indicates a change in the surface, basically. Okay, so that's my outline. So now I want to be applying some contour lines to my drawing. So when I first looked at the pear, you notice that I assessed the situation, right? I saw that there's light kind of hitting the top of my object, shadow down below, and I just kind of took that all in. So now I'm going to use that information to and apply it to my contouring, right? My contour lines. So in areas where there may be a shadow or some weight underneath the object, I would use a thicker, heavier line. That's a good place to start because I know that right off the bat. It gets shadowy right underneath my object. So that's a good place to start with a thicker, heavier line. And then as I go, I'm going to be investigating, all right, well, you know, there's light that hits this side of the pear, so that might be a thinner, more delicate line. Any grooves, like indentations in the surface of the pear, I would probably imply with like a thicker line to show that it's going inward. Any like fine details, little specks or markings on the pear, I'd probably do with a thinner line just because they are finer details. They're not bold. Okay, so just varying the line to show light and shadow and to show the form. Okay, so start here at the bottom where it's easiest. And when I put a thicker, heavier line, I'm actually pressing down with my pencil a little bit harder. I might even go back because it is so in shadow right there. Instead of like shading a shadow, right? There's a shadow being cast on the surface beneath the pear. I could drop in an outline actually, since I'm dealing with the shadow, if I wanted to do that. But instead of shading that in, I'm just going to imply that there's a shadow there by making a thick, heavy line, a bold line. So sometimes with a pencil, that means doubling over your line. Then it kind of thins out over here and picks up again. So I'm constantly looking at what's in front of me to get that information. I'm not making it up. I'm just looking at the object a lot. If we were in person, you would be able to see that my eyes just keep going down to my paper, but then back up to the object. Probably like 90% of the time I'm looking at the object rather than my paper. Okay, this gets a little bit lighter. This is where the light is. So the top of this pear has a lot of light hitting it on the right, but then as it moves this way, it gets a little bit more shadowy. So not shading, but just putting in maybe a thicker line. Not as thick as this one. I don't see it in that much shadow, but I do see it thicker than that line there. Okay, then that light picks up. See a highlight, so I would outline highlights with very light lines. So believe it or not, you can get a lot of variety of line with just a simple drawing utensil like a pencil. There's some markings on this pear, so I'll add those in. So this is all line, right, showing texture. They're just wispy lines. So sort of like hatching. If you ever do hatching and cross hatching, same basic thing. So you can add details like that. So get as detailed as you can with the line. Try to show as much information. Tell the viewer about this object with line. Okay, and there's one contour line drawing complete. For my second drawing, I'm going to upgrade to this shell. It's a bit more complex. It's got more stuff going on with it than the pear does. So that'll be my next sketch. And same thing, before I start, I just want to look at what's going on here, notice areas of shadow, notice areas of light, just kind of like assess the situation before I begin my drawing. I think it's always good to take in what it is you're seeing before you just launch right into your drawing. So for something like this, it is a little bit more complex. I might suggest drawing the part of it that's closest to you first. So for me, that part would be this. That's where I'm just naturally tending to begin, is the part of the shell that's closer to me. And then once I get that in, I can build the rest of it off of that. So that's a good starting point for those of you who aren't sure where to start. Just like the last drawing, I'm starting with a very light, loose line. Not worrying about contour lines yet. I'm just trying to get the thing on the paper. That's hard enough in itself. So concentrate on one thing at a time, basically. These little spiky things. Adjust this a little bit. This comes out more. I usually draw so light that I don't even really have to stop to erase. I can just draw right through a part of it that I want to adjust. And that works out fine. Actually, I have to adjust the angle of this. Now that I have that mapped out on the paper, I will start in with some contour lines. So starting in a place where, like towards the bottom of the object where there might be more shadow, is a good place to start. I notice each one of these spikes, the bottom of them are in shadow, but then as it wraps around, the light hits it and it turns into the light. So I'll just adjust my line, thicker, heavier line on the bottom. As the shell turns inward, or inward this way rather, there's a shadow in there. So to just imply that, I'm gonna put a thicker, heavier line right here. Try to imply that it turns inward. And then that lightens up as it comes this way. Just picks up light as it wraps around, so I'll put a thinner line. It's a little bit in shadow here. Most of the light is hitting like right here on the shell, but it's in shadow here along the edge. So put a thicker, heavier line there. Wrap around this way. Gonna throw in some of these ridges to help show the volume and the roundness of the shell. There are some markings on the shell, so I can add those in as well. There's a highlight here. Right, so all that stuff, just try to show it with line. It's like a challenge. How many things can I show in this object just using line? Turns into shadow here. In the shadow. Any little fine details I can do with a thinner, lighter line. Sometimes to lighten up a line, I just erase it a little bit. All right, so now just by dropping in those really simple contour lines, that flat shell drawing has transformed into something that looks like it has a little bit more form. For my final drawing for this video, I'm going to use a pen to draw, just to show you what that's like. As you get warmed up and you do many sketches in pencil, if you want to, you can try drawing with a pen. It's a little bit harder because you can't erase, obviously, but it's good practice to try drawing with pen because it forces you to be a little bit more accurate from the beginning because you can't erase. So I'll be using this pen, and I've switched. So my last two objects were more organic forms from nature. So my third object is going to be a man-made form. So I'll be drawing this stapler because many of the objects that you choose will be man-made objects, and they're a little bit different in approach. I actually find them a bit harder because they require getting correct angles, where with a pear or seashell, you know, if something's a little bit off, it's so organic, it's so rounded, it's not like a definite hard edge shape that if you are a little bit off, it doesn't really make a huge difference in your drawing. But if you're off with something like a stapler that has perspective and angles, it can take a little bit longer to try to adjust. So assume that it might take a little bit more time to draw something man-made that's a bit more complicated than a pear or a shell, although shells can be complicated sometimes too, depending on what you're drawing. But so I will begin, and the very first thing I'm going to look at is the angle that it's sitting on the surface in front of me. So I'll just swivel this one more time. if you notice, it's not like straight across and parallel with the edge of the page, but it's at an angle. And if you see what I'm doing with my pen here, I do this all the time to check angles. I use my drawing utensil and I hold it up to an edge to assess the angle. So I know that when I go to draw, I'm gonna draw it at an angle like that. So use your drawing utensil to kind of like figure out, okay, this angle's up a little bit more, this angle's up this way, this angle's back that way. Use this as a straight edge to help guide you when drawing a man-made object or an object that has harder edges that goes back in space and has perspective. So I use this as a tool all the time to do that. When I start, I'm gonna start with this bottom edge because that's going to establish where it's sitting on the paper, where it's sitting on the surface. So once I get that bottom edge established, I can kind of build up from there. So these are just little tips. If you're one of those people who just really has like no idea where to begin when drawing from observation, try to take my tips. They might help you. Try to use those things. So draw at an angle here. So when I draw with pen, trying to match that angle that I just showed you. Drawing the bottom from the bottom of the object up. When I draw with pen, I always make sure that I'm drawing very, very lightly to begin with. Same way I told you to draw with the pencil, but with pen, I try to even go a little bit lighter because I won't be able to erase. And you'll see at the end of my drawing, there will be mistakes that you can still see that would have been adjusted with, say, like drawing another darker line over it. You'll see that more once I get through this. So I'm not worrying about contour line yet. I'm just mapping the object out on the paper. If you remember, that's how we're always gonna start. Just light line, map out your object. Lightly on the paper, just get that thing on there, and then you can mess around with line quality after. Check my angles. This angle's parallel with that angle. So I'm correcting this. I noticed that this part of the stapler comes out a little farther than I originally made it. So just drawing right over the existing lines there and correcting them as I go. So at this point, I have the entire object mapped out on the paper. By the way, if you're drawing and you're using one full page for multiple sketches, if this drawing happened to overlap into that drawing or that drawing, that would be okay. I cleared it and it's not touching those drawings or overlapping those drawings. But if that did happen with some of your sketches, that's totally fine. So now I've got my object mapped out on the paper, and it exists very much just in the sketch phase. It's just a light line. It's very flat. You can't really get an idea of what the form is. You get a little idea, but not like a really detailed idea of what this form is that's in front of me. So I'm going to drop in some contour lines now. And remember, we're dropping in heavier, thicker contour lines for areas that are in shadow or to imply weight at the bottom of this slightly heavy object, to show things that turn inward. So there's an area where it goes like in and it's in shadow. I would do a thicker, heavier line there. And thinner, more delicate lines, say like on the top of the stapler, because that's where light is hitting it. and then thinner, more delicate lines for like little small details, outlining highlights and things like that on the shiny surface of the stapler. So here are 3 drawings ranging from less complex to more complex. You can see that they all imply a use of contour line to help show the form. I'm hoping that in this video, being able to watch me from start to finish, start with like a flatter, more basic sketch, I hope that you're able to see the difference that once you start using varying thicknesses of line, it can start to make the object look more dimensional. Now, if we really wanted to push it and make it look like very realistic rendering, that would require shading, right? Like you could really get to a very high level of realism with shading, but for a contour line, you really can do a lot with line. You notice here, on the stapler, I indicated where there are shadows and highlights without shading, without shadowing, but just dropping in lines to indicate that. And it just adds an added level of detail to give your object some details, to give it some form, and make it look a little bit more realistic. Now, your drawings may not look like this from the beginning, right? They might look a little rough to start. You might have some trouble just with the first step of getting your drawing down on the paper. But I promise you that if you put effort into it and you really try drawing from observation each and every object that you try to draw, eventually by the time we get to our 3rd, 4th, 5th page of sketches, you will see an improvement. So keep trying. Don't give up. I know that drawing from observation can be frustrating, but that's the idea of this week's warm-up sketches, is just to get you loosened up and get you really looking at what's in front of you, not drawing what you think you see, but actually drawing what you see, looking at the object a whole lot while you're studying it, and then trying to use that contour line to bring some form or 3-dimensionality to your objects.